I wonder what the electorate hopes for, who voted for the winner of the sanctions in March 2024. Do they really believe that life in the country will improve much? Because they put the discontented behind bars, forced the dissenters to go abroad, and now the air in the country will become cleaner. Today, the actions of the Russian authorities resemble senseless dancing with tambourines. When the roof has burst and water is gushing in the house, it is necessary to patch the holes or completely change the ceiling. But instead, the hosts perform ritual dances, as if this would help stop the flood. Remember how the president spoke before the elections. You can sleep in peace. Everything is stable. It can't be more stable. I foresee a qualitative leap, a jerk and a leap. By leaps and bounds towards prosperity and prosperity. Hooray! But in fact, over the past couple of years, foreign and domestic policy in the country seems to have fallen off the thread, since everything that the Russian leadership would not do only worsens the situation. At the same time, today from time to time you can find such statements. Did you know that Putin saved Russia? It was he who stopped the collapse of the country. It was he who strengthened state institutions. Under him, Russia began to be reckoned with on the international stage again, and the economy began to rise after the disastrous Gaidar reforms. It is extremely difficult to convince such Vladimir Putin fans, since orthodox obscurantists categorically do not accept any arguments that run counter to the dogmas in which they piously believe. But those who continue to believe in the myth that Putin raised Russia from its knees are becoming fewer every day. It is not surprising. As Abraham Lincoln used to say at the time, you can deceive a part of the people all the time and the whole people for a while, but you can't deceive the whole people all the time. Sooner or later, an epiphany comes. Moreover, every year the fact that the current government is deceiving the people is becoming more and more obvious. Let's talk about the myths about Putin that continue to be actively planted among the Russian population. Putin did not just lift Russia from its knees, he made it a strong world power. It was under Putin that Russia began to be reckoned with. It was under Putin that Russia ceased to be a weak and weak-willed country under the rule of the eternally drunk Boris Yeltsin. It was under Putin that the economy became stable, and the people began to look to the future with hope. It was under Putin that Russia returned Crimea. It was under Putin that Russia began not to buy grain abroad, but to sell it. Everything that we have now full store shelves, stability and confidence in the future, the opportunity to earn money and not unfasten the criminal roof, is all the merit of Vladimir Putin. And you scold him for nothing. In the West, a strong Russian president is like a bone in the throat. They don't need a strong Russia. Huge amounts of money are being allocated by America and NATO to destroy the country, return it to the state of the 90s again, turn it into a territory of chaos in order to freely seize its resources. So, let's analyze this opus. It may seem that he was told by some ordinary man in the street who seriously believes that there will be no Putin, there will be no Russia. It is possible that this is so, but most likely, this kind of work comes from Kremlin bots, specialists in information warfare on the internet. This is evidenced by the style and methodology of the evidence base. A simple man in the street is not able to present the situation so competently and consistently in the right way. Even if he is an ordinary Russian patriot bombed by TV, well, then everything is in order. First, how Putin stopped the collapse of the country. At the end of the 90s, the country did not even think of falling apart. Then there were other problems that are now incomprehensible to many. What does it mean when they talk about the collapse of Russia? Centrifugal forces, political and economic, tearing regions away from the federal center and threatening a new feudal fragmentation. Yes, there was such a period in the early 90s, but then many regional elites realized that they would not survive without the central government. Chechnya has managed to isolate itself from Moscow, but it has not been able to become an independent state. Moreover, the so-called independence has brought the Chechen Republic more problems than benefits. Of course, many regions were dissatisfied with the center, and many hotheads advocated the separation of their republic from the Russian Federation. But it did not go beyond conversations and fiery speeches in the local national press. The local ruling elite understood perfectly well that they could not survive without Moscow. Second, how Putin stopped the lawlessness of the 90s. Yes, indeed. In the dashing 90s, the process of dividing the assets of the Soviet Union created by generations of Soviet people under socialism began between representatives of the former Soviet nomenclature, which had long had a desire to appropriate the property available in the country for personal use. And this process took place then in an extremely rude and unpleasant form. The mayhem was deliberately arranged to catch big fish in muddy water. By the end of the 90s, the bulk of the Soviet heritage had already been divided, and oligarchs had a question about preserving the loot. This required a strong central government, which, by virtue of its authority among the population, would implicitly protect the status quo, legitimizing the results of the looting of the country by a handful of businessmen. In other words, then Vladimir Putin was needed. And he came. The third, how Putin made Russia a strong world power. The so-called power under Putin is nothing compared to the Soviet Union. Modern Russia occupies the 60th place in terms of GDP per capita, and the 49th place in terms of purchasing power of the population, 11th place in economic development. This is even worse than in 1999. Fourth, how Russia returned Crimea under Putin. Yes, this event happened during Putin's rule, but is it solely because of him? Before that, during the 14 years of his rule, Putin did not lift a finger to reunite Crimea with Russia. That's how it happened that the events in Kiev led to the Crimean Spring, and there was nowhere for the Russian authorities to go. If you do not meet the aspiration of the Crimeans, the Black Sea Fleet will rise up, and the rest of the army will support it, and then the days of power would be numbered. Fifth, how, under Putin, Russia began not to buy grain abroad, but to sell it. At first glance, this suggests that agriculture not only got back on its feet after the devastating 90s, but also became even more efficient than during the Soviet Union. But some people have always been interested in the question, why were 130 million tons of grain produced in the Soviet Union, and there was not enough they had to buy abroad, but now 90 million tons are more than enough, and you can sell the surplus? And the answer is simple. Grain is required not only for flour mills, but also for animal husbandry, and it was ruined. There is little natural milk in Russia. There is more and more dairy substitute from palm oil on the shelves. Sausage is also not entirely made of meat, with the addition of soy protein. And the greatest invention of mankind is flavors identical to natural ones. Why do we need animal husbandry? Has so much trouble. And the surplus grain can be sold to others. Let them feed their cattle and poultry. Sixth, in the West, Putin is like a bone in the throat. Who told you that Putin is not acceptable to the West? Putin is extremely beneficial to both America and the entire global financial oligarchy. For more than 20 years of Putin's rule, trillions of dollars have been pumped from Russia to Western banks. In addition, it was under Putin that Russia became the largest market for not only industrial, but also food products. Seventh, the State Department allocates huge sums to range a color revolution in Russia and get rid of Putin. The entire opposition exists on the money of the State Department and acts in its interests. Not all of them, but only the liberal opposition. No one will ever give a penny to the leftist and national patriotic forces. And this is understandable. Financing your gravediggers is a sign of madness. Neither the Communist Party nor the Left Front receive overseas grants to bring down Putin. And the liberals get it, because they are even more beneficial to the global oligarchs than the Putin regime. It is enough for liberals to come to power in Putin's place, and the destruction of Russia will be a matter of several months, not decades. Eighth, the welfare of the people has grown under Putin. Now many people have 2 foreign cars per family, and the number of cars has doubled in 20 years. What does it mean when it comes to welfare? Salary growth. Yes, the amount of salaries has increased over these 20 years, and at times, but prices have gone up more. This is called inflation. And as for cars, which have doubled in number, this is not an indicator of welfare growth, but of scientific and technological progress. Any technologically complex product goes through several stages. At first, it is a luxury available exclusively to the powerful of this world. Then, an attribute of high social status. Well, then it becomes commonplace. Think about cell phones. At first, it was a luxury available only to bankers. Then, to those who have extra money. Well, now many people can't imagine life without this device. And personal computers. In the 90s, it was a luxury available only to oligarchs because it cost fabulous money. Already in the early noughties, this product began to become cheaper and move from the category of luxury to the category of everyday life. Now every family, despite the standard of living and social status, has a personal computer with internet access. It's the same with cars. 30 years ago, a foreign car was a luxury that not many people allowed themselves. 20 years ago, officials and successful entrepreneurs. And now, foreign cars have become available to everyone, because their price has fallen so much that it is quite comparable even with a low income level. This is scientific and technological progress. When a technical innovation was available only to the rich yesterday, today it is available to the middle class, and tomorrow even the poorest will use it. In fact, who is Vladimir Putin? Official propaganda broadcasts that this is the savior of Russia. And it really is. Putin is the savior of Russia. Modern Russia, mired in corruption, unprecedented luxury of oligarchs, and catastrophic poverty of the common people. if it had not been for Putin. In the late 90s there would have been a popular uprising supported by the army, and then all the conquests of Gaidarchibais reforms would have turned to dust. The people would have regained their factories and plants, mineral resources and natural resources, taken from them by a bunch of crooks during the privatization. But there was no uprising then, because the oligarchs understood perfectly well that the country needed a new leader, one who would calm the people and thereby protect the loot from being returned to its rightful owner. And here's Putin for you. Well, then, everything is according to the rules of marketing and the basics of Goebbels' propaganda. At the beginning of the 21st century, Putinism was a kind of Bonapartism, a form of dictatorship that holds on to power, relying not only on the power and bureaucratic apparatus, but also attracting the lower classes to its side with the help of social demagogy and individual populist handouts. The meaning of Bonapartism is not so much in the charisma of the leader, as in primitive socio-political bargaining. And one more definition of this term. Bonapartism is a dictatorship that proclaims its goal to restore order in the country and thereby attracts to its side the broad masses of the people, who are aware of the disastrous reign of anarchy. It is the fear of all-encompassing chaos that is the life-giving force that allows political leaders of this type to successfully resist ideological opponents and hold power in their hands. In the future, studying the history of Russia, people will call our modernity a period of reaction, and the term Putinism will be perceived only as one of the forms of Bonapartism established in Russia at the turn of the century and allowed a bunch of scoundrels who plundered the whole country during the Gaidarchibais reforms to receive fabulous profits from the appropriated property for quite a long time. And of course, historians of the future will explore Putinism as a phenomenon in the history of Russia in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, and the causes of its occurrence, historical, economic, geopolitical, social and others, and the personality of Putin himself as the bearer of this phenomenon. And it is particularly necessary to emphasize the role of propaganda through the media, which planted in the masses the myth that Putin raised Russia from its knees, thanks to which Putinism remained an unshakable form of government for a long time, despite its obvious depravity. Volumes of scientific research articles, monographs will be written, many dissertations will be defended, dozens of journalistic films will be shot. It will be quite obvious to posterity that Putinism is a form of dictatorship, one of the varieties of Bonapartism, which aims to exploit Russia in the interests of a bunch of renegade oligarchs, high-ranking officials and heads of law enforcement agencies. It will be a story for them,